My daughter just told her husband that I forgot to turn off the gas stove twice last week. Problem is, I switched to electric 3 years ago. I was lying under the ventilation system in the basement, tightening the last bolt, when I heard Jessica talking to David in the living room. The house I built with these hands has something they don't know about. Every sound from upstairs travels straight down here through the old ductwork. Dad's showing clear signs of decline. Jessica's voice floated down like whispers in a church. Last week he forgot to turn off the gas stove twice. We can't let this situation continue. I stopped turning the wrench. Forgot to turn off the gas stove? The same gas stove I dismantled and replaced with electric 3 years ago. Right after Jessica complained about the dangerous gas smell? I remember it clearly because she stood right here in this very kitchen, pointing at the newly installed electric cooktop and saying, "Now I feel so much better about you, Dad." I understand your feelings, David's voice dry as sand. But we have to be realistic. He's 72, living alone in a house this big. The risk is too high. I've been researching Sunset Manor, Jessica continued, her voice excited like she was discussing vacation plans. It's professional, has 24-hour medical staff, and most importantly, will be able to handle this house. Handle. Not sell, not transfer, but handle, like the house I spent 3 years building was just a problem that needed solving. Dad promised he'd leave this house to you, David said. With the current Phoenix real estate market, we could get at least 600,000. After covering nursing home costs for the first few years, we'd still have a substantial amount left to invest. We, the word hit my ears like a hammer blow. Not you'll have, not the family will benefit, but we, as if David, the man I once loaned $30,000 to buy that Mercedes parked outside, also had rights to the house I built with my own sweat and blood. I deliberately dropped a screw onto the concrete floor. The metallic clang echoed through the basement space like a bell. The conversation upstairs stopped immediately. "Is Dad home?" Jessica asked, sounding slightly worried. "His truck's still parked outside," David replied. "He's probably doing something in the basement. He's always tinkering with that stuff." That stuff, as if maintaining the house they planned to handle was just the meaningless hobby of an old man. I lay still, listening to their footsteps move upstairs. The master bedroom door closed with a soft click. They'd moved their discussion about my fate to somewhere more private, somewhere they thought I couldn't hear. But they forgot one thing. I built this house. I know where every sound comes from, where it goes and where it ends up. I sat up, brushing concrete dust off my work shirt. In my head, the pieces were starting to rearrange themselves. The gas stove didn't exist. The memory decline wasn't real. The household accidents had never happened. They'd built an entire false medical file for me, and I didn't even know I was playing the patient in their drama. I went upstairs to the kitchen and grabbed a beer from the fridge. Through the window I saw David's black Mercedes parked right next to my 15-year-old Ford F-150. This scene suddenly took on a different meaning. The car I'd helped them buy with an emergency loan parked beside the truck I was still making monthly payments on. I opened the kitchen drawer and pulled out the yellowed manila folder. Inside were 30 years of my financial history with Jessica. Every receipt, every bank transfer, every check I'd written. I never thought I'd need them as evidence in family court. University of Arizona tuition, $180,000 over 4 years. "Dad, I need to focus on my studies instead of worrying about money." So I worked double shifts at the wood shop to make sure she could focus. Investment in Jessica's Closet Boutique, $75,000. "This is my opportunity, Dad. I'll pay you back as soon as the revenue stabilizes." The store closed after 8 months. She said it was due to an unsuitable market. The loan was never mentioned again. Divorce costs from Brad, Jessica's first husband. $50,000 for lawyers, plus $30,000 in living support for 6 months. I need to protect Emma's and my own interests, Dad. Emma, my granddaughter, now 18 and a freshman at UCLA. She calls me every Sunday, unlike her mother. Down payment for Jessica's current house in Scottsdale, $45,000. I need a stable place to raise Emma. This isn't a gift, Dad. This is an investment in your granddaughter's future. I pulled out my calculator and added it up. $350,000. That's more money than many people make in a lifetime. All of it for Jessica, who was now upstairs planning to handle my house for more money. Footsteps coming down the stairs interrupted my thoughts. I quickly closed the folder but deliberately left it slightly open on the kitchen table. If Jessica was as smart as I thought, she'd notice it. And if she noticed it, I'd know the extent of her curiosity or her greed. "Dad!" Jessica entered the kitchen with a bright smile that I used to love but now looked more like a mask. "I didn't know you were home. David and I just stopped by to visit." I looked straight into the blue eyes she inherited from Margaret. The eyes my wife used to say were clear as mountain lakes. Now I saw something in them that Margaret never had. Calculation. "Visit me?" I asked, my voice calm. "Or is there another purpose?" Jessica's eyes quickly glanced down at the kitchen table where the folder lay. Her gaze lingered there for a second, then returned to me. Bingo! She'd seen it. "Nothing special, Dad," she said, but her voice trembled slightly. "I'm just worried about you. You seem tired lately." David appeared in the kitchen doorway, placing his hand on Jessica's shoulder like a gesture of ownership. He stood 6'2", dressed in a suit like he'd just come from court, with cold gray eyes that always made me think of sharks. "We think maybe you should have someone taking care of you," David said, his voice professional like he was consulting a client. "At this age, independent living can pose unnecessary risks." "Risks," I repeated the word like I was tasting it. "What kind of risks?" "Oh, you know, Dad," Jessica said quickly. "Household accidents, falling downstairs, forgetting to turn off appliances. These things happen frequently with elderly people." I nodded slowly as if considering her words. "I see. So what do you think I should do?" Jessica and David exchanged glances, a silent conversation they'd practiced. This was the moment they'd prepared for in their psychological warfare. "We've researched some high-quality senior care communities in the area," David said, his voice like reading a business report. "Places with professional medical staff, rich social activities, and a community of peers. Nursing homes," I said bluntly. "Not nursing homes, Dad," Jessica protested, sounding as if I'd just insulted her. "These are assisted living communities. Completely different. You'd have your own apartment, freedom to move around, but also safety and professional care when needed." I took a sip of beer, letting the silence stretch for several seconds. They'd rehearsed this conversation very carefully. Every word was chosen to sound like they cared about my welfare, not about turning this house into cash. "What happens to this house?" I asked. "Well, that's something we'll need to discuss," Jessica said, her voice careful like walking on eggshells. "You don't need a house this big anymore, and the money from selling it could help cover long-term care costs." I repeated. "That's an interesting word choice." David frowned. "What do you mean?" I smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. "Nothing. I just think decisions about a house's future should belong to whoever owns it." The room went quiet. I could hear the tick-tock of the wall clock Margaret bought 20 years ago. I could see the wheels turning in Jessica and David's heads, trying to calculate how much I knew. "Of course, Dad," Jessica finally said, her voice like comforting a child. "But you've also told me many times that you want this house to belong to me eventually. I'm just trying to do what's best for everyone." "What's best for everyone," I repeated, nodding as if understanding something profound. "I see." We stood in tense silence. The air in the room felt like it was waiting for someone to say something, do something, or confess something. "Would you like me to leave some materials for you to look over?" Jessica asked, her voice hopeful. "About these care communities. I think you'd be impressed with what they offer." "Why not?" I said. "I'll take a look at them." Jessica broke into a smile like she'd just won an auction. "Wonderful, Dad. I'll bring them over this weekend." After they left, I sat in the kitchen with the folder still on the table. Jessica had seen it. She'd been curious about it, but she'd decided not to ask anything. That told me everything I needed to know about her level of confidence, and about how dangerous this situation was. I opened the folder again, this time not for self-pity, but for strategy. $350,000. That wasn't just money. And most importantly, that was ammunition. If Jessica wanted to play the game of who cares about Dad most, I'd show her who taught her everything about strategy. But first, I needed to know just how smart she was. I left the folder open on the table and went outside to water the rose bushes Margaret had planted. From the yard, I could see the kitchen table through the window. If someone visited while I wasn't home, I'd know. 2 days later, when I returned from Home Depot with new bolts for the ventilation system, I immediately checked the folder. Some pages had been moved. The order of receipts had changed. Someone had come here, opened the folder, read through everything, and tried to arrange it back as it was. Jessica had a key to my house from the years when I was still working and needed someone to watch the place during weekend business trips. I'd never asked for the key back because I trusted my daughter. Now I knew how that trust had been abused. But more importantly, now I knew Jessica wasn't just planning my future. She was monitoring me to make sure I didn't do anything to ruin her plan. I smiled for the first time since hearing that fateful conversation. My daughter was smart. She had strategy. She was prepared. But she'd just made a fatal mistake. She assumed I was a naive old man she could easily manipulate. She forgot that I'd spent my entire life building things from the ground up. And the first rule of construction is, always measure twice before you cut. Now it was time for me to start measuring. 2 days after discovering that Jessica had rifled through my folder, I decided to make my first move, but not the move I actually wanted to make. This was the move I wanted her to see. I called Marcus Wheeler on Monday morning, knowing that Jessica usually went to yoga on Tuesday afternoons and always drove past Marcus's law office on her way home. I deliberately scheduled the appointment for 2 o'clock, right when she'd be driving by. Marcus, I need to meet with you to discuss some legal matters, I said over the phone. Nothing urgent, just want to understand more about my property rights. Of course, Harold. How about Tuesday at 2 o'clock? We can sit down and go through everything thoroughly. Perfect, I'll be there. Tuesday afternoon, I parked my truck right in front of Marcus's office, where anyone driving by couldn't miss it. Marcus's office was the same as always, brown leather chairs, mahogany desk, and the smell of old papers mixed with coffee. He welcomed me with the warm handshake I'd grown accustomed to over the past 10 years. Harold, good to see you. You look like you're worried about something. What's going on? I sat down and opened a manila folder, not the one Jessica had searched through, but a different one I'd prepared. Marcus, I need to understand about my house ownership. Specifically, what would happen if someone claimed I was no longer competent to manage my property? Marcus frowned and leaned forward. Harold, is someone threatening to do that? No one's making direct threats, I said, carefully choosing my words. But Jessica's been showing a lot of concern lately about me living alone. She's worried about my safety, and I just want to know my rights in case she decides I need to be protected. Marcus nodded with understanding. I see your concern. For someone to challenge your legal competency, they'd need clear medical evidence, not just personal opinions, but reports from doctors, possibly psychologists, and they'd have to prove that you can't make reasonable financial decisions. What about the house? If they succeeded in proving I'm incompetent, a court-appointed guardian would have authority to manage your assets, including the decision to sell the house if they believed it was in your best interest. Marcus paused and looked at me intently. But Harold, you're completely lucid and competent. Anyone trying to challenge that would have a hard time finding convincing evidence. We talked for another 30 minutes about guardianship law and asset protection. Marcus explained the legal process in detail, the safeguards in place, and how the system worked. Useful information, but that wasn't the main purpose of this meeting. The main purpose was for Jessica to see my truck parked there. When I left, I deliberately took the long route past Jessica's neighborhood in Scottsdale. Her white Mercedes was turning into her driveway just as I drove by. Perfect. She definitely saw me. I went home and waited. I didn't have to wait long. The phone rang at 6:15 that evening. Hi, Dad, Jessica's voice was carefully casual, but I could hear the hidden tension underneath. How are you feeling today? What did you do today? Oh, the usual, sweetheart, I replied naturally. I went to see Marcus Wheeler to talk about some legal matters. There was a brief pause. Then, Marcus Wheeler? The lawyer? Is something wrong? Nothing's wrong, honey. At my age, I just think I should understand more about my rights and property. I want to make sure everything is arranged properly. That's very wise of you, Dad, Jessica said. But her voice sounded worried. But you know, if you need legal advice, David works with real estate and estate issues every day. He could help you review everything to make sure you're getting the best counsel. I smiled. This was exactly the reaction I'd expected. That's thoughtful of you, Jessica. But Marcus has handled our family's affairs for years. He understands my situation and I trust him. Of course, Dad. I just want to make sure you're getting the best support possible. Sometimes longtime lawyers might not be current with all the recent changes in the law. Marcus seems very current, I said. He explained a lot of things I never knew about guardianship law and asset protection. This pause was longer. Guardianship law? Why would you be interested in that? Oh, just general knowledge, honey. Marcus said many elderly people should understand their rights in case family members become concerned about their ability to live independently. I could hear Jessica swallow over the phone. Do you feel like family members are concerned about you? Not exactly, I said, as if I was considering it. But you did mention that I might need someone to take care of me. I just want to understand my options. Dad, I never want you to feel like we're trying to control your life. I just want you to be safe and happy. I know you mean well, Jessica, and I appreciate your concern. We talked for a few more minutes about the weather and weekend plans, but I could sense the unease in Jessica's voice. She was worried about what I might be planning, exactly as I'd hoped. The next morning, the phone rang at 9 o'clock. Mr. Mitchell? This is David Stevens, Jessica's husband. Hello, David. What can I do for you? I heard you met with a lawyer yesterday. As someone who works in estate law, I want to make sure you're receiving the most appropriate counsel for your situation. David's voice was very professional, but I could hear the underlying threat. Why would you think I'm not receiving appropriate counsel? Oh, not at all, David said quickly. Marcus Wheeler is a good attorney, but estate law and asset protection have become very complex in recent years. There are many new strategies, changes in tax regulations, and modern approaches to asset protection that you might not be fully informed about. I let him continue for 5 minutes about the complexity of modern law and the importance of having a comprehensive legal team. Finally, I interrupted. David, are you suggesting that Marcus isn't competent to advise me? No, not at all, David said, but his voice sounded slightly strained. I just think that as family, we should ensure that you have all available options and information. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting with everyone. You, Jessica, me, and Marcus, if you'd like. We could review the entire situation and make sure everything is being handled optimally. Here it was. They wanted to control my legal conversations. That's an interesting offer, David, I said slowly, but I think I can manage my legal affairs independently at this time. If I need additional opinions, I'll certainly consider your suggestion. There was a moment of silence. Then David said, Of course, Harold. I just want you to know we're here to support you. The offer remains open. When I hung up, I knew I'd succeeded in my first move. Jessica and David had reacted exactly as I'd predicted. They were worried about what I might be planning, and they were trying to insert themselves into my legal process. But more importantly, they'd shown their hand. David wasn't just Jessica's husband in this scheme. He was the legal strategist. They were prepared to use his law knowledge to challenge or control whatever I might try to do. That afternoon, I drove to South Phoenix to see Maria Gonzalez. It was time I needed an ally. Maria lived in a neat little house with a beautiful garden that always smelled of traditional Mexican food. When she opened the door, concern immediately showed on her face. Harold, what's wrong? You look like you're carrying a heavy burden. I went inside and sat down at her small kitchen table. This was the first time I'd visited her house not for work, and I felt a bit awkward. Maria, I need to tell you about some things that are happening, and I need to ask you about some things you might have noticed while working at my house. I told her about the conversation I'd overheard, about Jessica searching through my documents, and about the phone calls over the past 2 days. Maria listened without interrupting, occasionally shaking her head or making angry sounds. I never trusted that girl, Maria said when I finished. Always too many questions about money, about your health, about how you manage things. What did she ask specifically? Maria stood up and poured 2 cups of coffee. She always asked if you ever seemed confused, if you ever forgot to pay bills, if you ever repeated stories. She asked about your medications, about whether you went to the doctor regularly. I thought she was just a caring daughter. I felt a cold wave run down my spine. What did you tell her? I told the truth, that you're one of the smartest people I know, that you never forget anything important, that you manage the house and finances better than many people younger than you. Maria sat down and looked at me seriously. But now I understand. She wasn't asking out of concern. She was looking for problems. Maria, I said, carefully choosing my words, I need to ask you something important. Would you be willing to help me? This could get complicated and you might have to face some difficult questions from Jessica. Maria didn't hesitate. What do you need me to do? I need someone they don't suspect. Someone who can observe and listen without making them suspicious. Jessica trusts you because she thinks you're just the hired help. Maria's eyes lit up with understanding. You want me to be a spy. I want you to help me protect myself from what they're planning. Maria nodded decisively. Harold, I've worked in wealthy houses long enough to know when someone is being taken advantage of, and I've seen enough spoiled children to recognize one when I see one. Tell me what you need. We spent the next hour planning. Maria would continue working weekly at my house as usual, but now she'd pay attention to any phone calls, conversations, or unusual activities. She'd report back to me about anything Jessica or David said when they thought no one was listening. There's one more thing, I said as we were finishing up. If they ask you about me, about my mental health, about my capabilities, what will you say? I'll tell the truth, Maria said firmly, that you're an intelligent, capable man who is perfectly able to take care of himself. And if they don't like that, they can find another housekeeper. As I drove home that evening, I felt more confident than I had since hearing that fateful conversation. I had an ally. I had information. And most importantly, I had tested Jessica and David's reactions. They had passed the first test. They were worried, they were reactive, and they'd shown some of their cards. Now it was time for the next move. 3 days after my alliance with Maria was established, I made what appeared to be the biggest mistake of my life. I called Jessica and essentially surrendered. But sometimes the best way to win a war is to let your enemy think they've already won the battle. I waited until Thursday evening, knowing Jessica would be home from her weekly dinner with her book club friends. She'd be relaxed, probably having a glass of wine, feeling social and confident, perfect timing for what I was about to do. Jessica, sweetheart, I said when she answered the phone, I've been doing a lot of thinking since our conversation the other day, and I wanted to talk to you about those care communities you mentioned. There was a pause. Then her voice lit up like I'd just told her she'd won the lottery. Oh, Dad, I'm so glad you're open to exploring your options. I think once you see what these places offer, you'll realize how wonderful they could be for you. You know, after talking to Marcus about all those legal complexities, I'm starting to think that maybe I am getting in over my head trying to manage everything myself, I said, putting just the right amount of weariness in my voice. All this talk about guardianship and asset protection, it's making me realize how complicated things have become. Dad, there's nothing wrong with recognizing when you need support, Jessica said, and I could hear her barely containing her excitement. That's actually a sign of wisdom, not weakness. I was wondering if you and David might have time to come over this weekend. Maybe we could sit down together and you could show me some of those brochures you mentioned. I'd really value your guidance on this. Of course, we'd love to come over. How about Saturday evening? Say around 6 o'clock. I'll bring all the information I've gathered, and David can explain some of the financial aspects. That sounds perfect, sweetheart. I really appreciate how much thought you've put into this. Dad, I'm just so proud of you for being proactive about planning for your future. It shows how much you care about your family and want to make sure we're all taken care of. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and allowed myself a moment of genuine sadness. The daughter I'd raised was so excited about the prospect of controlling my life that she could barely contain herself, but I pushed that feeling aside. I had a performance to prepare for. Friday morning, Maria arrived for her weekly cleaning. This was the first time she'd be in the house since our conversation, and I could see the determination in her eyes. "How are you feeling about tomorrow night?" she asked as she unpacked her cleaning supplies. "Like an actor preparing for the most important role of his life," I said. "I need to be convincing enough that they drop their guard completely, but not so convincing that they rush me into something before I'm ready. What do you need me to do? Just clean as usual, but if they say anything about me, about the house, about their plans, remember every word. They're going to feel very confident after tomorrow night, and confident people sometimes say more than they should." Saturday arrived with the kind of clear Arizona sky that made you forget it was December. I spent the day preparing my stage. I moved some of my father's old medical equipment from the garage into the living room, a walker I'd inherited but never used, some pill organizers that had been sitting empty in a drawer. I left a few utility bills scattered on the kitchen counter, making sure to include one that showed a late fee, not because I'd actually paid it late, but because I'd deliberately held onto a bill from 6 months ago when I'd been traveling and had to pay it after the due date. I dressed in clothes that were clean but slightly rumpled, and I made sure to look tired. Not dramatically so, but just enough to reinforce the image they wanted to see. Jessica and David arrived exactly at 6, both dressed like they were going to a business meeting. Jessica carried a leather portfolio that looked expensive enough to feed a small family for a month, and David had his ever-present briefcase. "Dad, you look tired," Jessica said, giving me a hug that felt more like an assessment than affection. "Have you been getting enough sleep?" "Oh, you know how it is," I said, shuffling just slightly as I led them to the living room. My mind's been racing with everything we talked about. All those legal complications Marcus mentioned, thinking about the future, it's a lot for an old man to process. David's eyes immediately went to the walker in the corner. "I see you've been using some mobility assistance. That old thing?" I glanced at it dismissively. "I pulled it out of the garage the other day when my back was acting up. Your mother bought it for her father years ago, and I guess I never got around to donating it after he passed. It wasn't technically a lie. Margaret had bought it for her father. The fact that he'd never actually used it wasn't something I felt compelled to mention." "Well, it's good that you have it available when you need it," Jessica said, settling into the chair across from me. "That's exactly the kind of thing I worry about. You having a bad day and not having the support you need." David opened his briefcase and pulled out a yellow legal pad. "Before we look at the care communities, Harold, I thought we might go through some of the financial aspects. Understanding the numbers will help you make the best decision." For the next hour, they laid out their complete vision of my future with the thoroughness of a military campaign. Jessica spread brochures across my coffee table while David created charts on his legal pad. They had researched everything: the costs of different levels of care, the waiting lists at various facilities, even the tax implications of selling the house. "Sunset Manor really seems like the best fit for you," Jessica said, pointing to a glossy photograph of smiling seniors playing cards. "They have a golf course, 3 restaurants, and the medical staff is available around the clock. The financial structure makes sense too," David added, showing me his calculations. "With the equity in this house, you'd have enough to cover the entry fee and probably 15 to 20 years of monthly costs, depending on which level of care you eventually need." 15 to 20 years, I repeated, as if the timeline was overwhelming me. "That seems like such a long time to plan for." "That's the beauty of starting early," Jessica said enthusiastically. "You get to choose your living situation while you're still healthy and independent, rather than waiting until there's a crisis." I nodded slowly, playing the part of an elderly man trying to process complex information. "What about this house? What would happen to all of Margaret's things, all our memories? We'd help you go through everything and keep the most important items, Jessica assured me. The facility has storage areas, and you can personalize your apartment with your favorite furniture and photographs. And the house itself? David leaned forward with his business expression. We'd want to list it as soon as possible to take advantage of the current market. Real estate prices in this area have been climbing steadily, but markets can change quickly. The sooner we act, the better position you'll be in financially. How soon? I asked, injecting just a hint of anxiety into my voice. Well, ideally, we'd want to get you on the waiting list at Sunset Manor within the next few weeks, Jessica said. They told me they have an opening coming up in January, but we'd need to move quickly to secure it. January, I said faintly. That's only a month away. I know it seems fast, Dad, but good opportunities don't wait. And honestly, the sooner you make the transition, the easier it will be to adjust. David pulled out another set of papers. I've taken the liberty of preparing some preliminary paperwork. Nothing binding, just the initial applications and financial disclosure forms. If you're comfortable with it, we could submit these next week. There it was. They weren't just planning my future. They were implementing it whether I was ready or not. This is a lot to take in, I said, rubbing my temples as if I had a headache. I appreciate all the work you've done, but I need some time to think about this. Of course, Dad, Jessica said, but I could hear the impatience creeping into her voice. How much time do you think you'll need? Maybe a week or two. I'd like to sleep on it. Maybe visit one of these places myself. That's a great idea, David said. In fact, I could arrange a tour of Sunset Manor for early next week. You could see the facilities, meet some of the staff, maybe even have lunch there. We could all go together, Jessica added. Make it a family outing. I was quiet for a long moment, letting them think I was seriously considering their proposal. Finally, I sighed deeply. You know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe I have been trying to handle too much on my own. I looked up at them with what I hoped appeared to be grateful resignation. If you think Sunset Manor is the best choice, then let's schedule that tour. Jessica practically glowed with triumph. Dad, I think you're making the right decision. I really do. And Harold, David said, I want you to know that we'll handle all the complicated aspects, the financial arrangements, the legal paperwork, the coordination with the facility. You don't need to worry about any of those details. That's very kind of you both, I said. I'm lucky to have family who cares so much about my well-being. They stayed for another hour, finalizing plans and discussing logistics. Jessica would call Sunset Manor first thing Monday morning to arrange the tour. David would begin preparing the financial documentation needed for the application. They'd handle the preliminary conversations with a real estate agent to get a market assessment of the house. We should probably get a current appraisal, David mentioned casually, for the financial planning purposes. Whatever you think is best, I said wearily. I trust your judgment. After they left, I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by the brochures they'd left behind. Each one showed the same thing: elderly people smiling, participating in activities, looking grateful to be cared for. Not one of them showed an elderly person making an independent decision or controlling their own life. I gathered up the brochures and put them in a neat stack on my kitchen counter. Then I called Maria. How did it go? She asked immediately. They think they've won, I said. They're moving faster than I expected, but that might actually work in our favor. What do you mean? They're so confident now that they're going to get careless. Jessica's already talking about tours and applications. David's preparing financial paperwork without even confirming that I have legal authority to sign anything yet. What's the next step? Monday morning, Jessica's going to call Sunset Manor. David's going to contact real estate agents. They're going to start the process of disposing of my life. I paused. That's when we spring our trap. Are you ready for this, Harold? I looked around my kitchen, the kitchen where Margaret had made thousands of meals, where I'd helped Emma with her homework, where I'd planned and built our entire life together. I've been ready for this since the moment I heard them planning to take it all away. Sunday passed quietly. I spent the morning reading the newspaper and drinking coffee, playing the part of a man who had accepted his fate. In the afternoon, I sat on my back patio, looking at the garden Margaret had planted 20 years ago. But my mind wasn't on memories. It was on timing. Jessica would call Sunset Manor Monday morning. David would start his preliminary financial review. They'd begin the process of turning me from a person into a problem to be managed. What they didn't know was that while they'd been planning my elimination, I'd been planning their education. Monday morning arrived with the crisp December air that made Phoenix winters almost bearable. I got up early, made coffee, and sat by the phone. I knew Jessica would call me after she spoke with Sunset Manor, and I wanted to be ready. The phone rang at 10:30. Dad, I have wonderful news. Jessica's voice was practically bubbling with excitement. I spoke with the admissions coordinator at Sunset Manor, and they do have an opening coming available in January. They can schedule a tour for us this Wednesday if you're available. Wednesday, I said, as if checking my mental calendar. Yes, I think I can manage that. Perfect. I also spoke with David this morning,
and he's identified a real estate agent who specializes in this area. She'd like to come by and do a preliminary assessment of the house, just so we know what we're working with financially. And there it was. They were moving even faster than I'd anticipated. When would she want to come by? Actually, she's available this afternoon if that works for you. I know it seems quick, but David explained our timeline, and she understands the importance of moving efficiently. This afternoon, I repeated. I suppose I really do, Dad. The sooner we have all the information, the better decisions we can make. I agreed to the real estate visit, and Jessica promised to be there to help coordinate everything. After I hung up, I called Maria. They're coming today, I told her. Real estate agent this afternoon, tour on Wednesday. They're not wasting any time. Are you sure you're ready for this? I looked around my kitchen one more time, at the coffee mug Margaret had bought me for Father's Day 15 years ago, at the small dent in the wall where Emma had thrown a tennis ball when she was 8, at the window that looked out on the rose garden where I'd proposed to Margaret 45 years ago. Maria, they've just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They think I'm a helpless old man who's going to passively let them take everything I've worked for. And what are you really? I smiled for the first time in days. I'm a man who's about to teach his daughter that underestimating people is a very expensive lesson.
Monday afternoon brought Sandra Chen from Desert Palms Realty, exactly as Jessica had promised. What Jessica didn't know was that while she was arranging for someone to evaluate my house, I was arranging for someone to buy it. I had called Tom Williamson early Monday morning, before Jessica's excited phone call about Sunset Manor. Tom was a high school math teacher I'd met 6 months ago at the hardware store when we were both buying supplies for weekend projects. His wife Sarah was a registered nurse at Phoenix Children's Hospital, and they had 2 kids, Emma, 8, and Lucas, 6. More importantly, they'd been looking for a house in my neighborhood for over a year but kept getting outbid in the crazy Phoenix market. Tom, this is Harold Mitchell. We met at Home Depot a while back. You were buying lumber for your deck project. Of course, Harold. How's that kitchen renovation coming along? Actually, that's not why I'm calling. I have a proposition that might interest you and Sarah. Would you be available to come by my house this evening? Around 7 o'clock? Sure, we can do that. Is everything okay? Everything's fine. I just have an opportunity that I think might be perfect for your family, and I'd rather discuss it in person. When Tom and Sarah arrived that evening with their kids, I could see the hope in their eyes as they looked at my house. It was exactly what they'd been searching for. 4 bedrooms, mature landscaping, a neighborhood where kids could ride bikes safely. Harold, this is a beautiful home, Sarah said as I showed them through the living room. But I have to ask, are you thinking about selling? I am, I said simply, and I'd like to sell it to you. Tom looked confused. We'd love that, but honestly, Harold, houses in this area are going for $600,000 or more. We've been trying for months, but we keep getting outbid by cash buyers or investors. What if I told you I'd sell it to you for $450,000, cash deal, close in 2 weeks? Sarah nearly dropped the coffee cup I'd handed her. That's significantly under market value. Are you sure? I sat down across from them, watching their kids explore my backyard through the sliding glass door. Emma was pushing Lucas on the old tire swing I'd hung for my granddaughter years ago. Tom, Sarah, I'm going to be direct with you. My family is pressuring me to move into assisted living, and they want to sell this house to maximize their inheritance. But I'd rather see it go to a family who will love it the way my wife and I did. Harold, Tom said carefully, are you sure you want to make such a big financial sacrifice? $450,000 is a lot of money to leave on the table. I'm 72 years old. I have more money than I need, and what I need most right now is to know that this house will be loved by people who understand what a home means. I paused, watching Emma help her little brother reach higher on the swing. Your kids would be happy here. That's worth more to me than an extra $150,000. Sarah had tears in her eyes. We could do $450. We've been saving for so long, and we just got approved for a loan that would cover that amount. Then let's make it happen. But I need this to stay between us until the papers are signed. My family thinks they're going to control the sale of this house, and I'd prefer they find out they're wrong after it's too late for them to interfere. Tom and Sarah exchanged glances. Are you sure this is what you want? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. We shook hands on it that night. Tom said he could have a lawyer draw up the paperwork by Wednesday, and we could close by the end of the following week. It was fast, but I needed fast. Tuesday morning I had another task to handle. While Jessica was probably on the phone with Sunset Manor confirming our tour arrangements, I was at First National Bank with Maria, converting my life savings into a more liquid form. Mr. Mitchell, said Patricia Williams, the bank manager I'd known for 15 years, you're talking about moving a substantial amount of money. Are you sure you want to liquidate all these accounts? Patricia, I'm restructuring my finances for retirement planning, I said smoothly. I need the flexibility to move funds quickly as opportunities arise. Maria sat beside me, playing the role of my assistant perfectly. She dressed professionally and carried a notebook, looking every bit like someone helping an elderly man organize his affairs. We can certainly help you with that, Patricia said. Would you like to keep any of the funds in checking, or transfer everything to money market accounts? I'd like to diversify across several institutions, I said. Can you help me set up accounts at 3 different banks? I want to spread the risk. For the next 2 hours, Patricia helped me reorganize my entire financial life. By the time we were finished, I had access to over $800,000 in liquid assets, spread across multiple banks, with Maria listed as my financial power of attorney. Harold, Maria said as we left the bank, are you absolutely certain about this? Once we sign those papers with the Williamson family, there's no going back. Maria, my daughter thinks she's going to manage my money for me. She's about to learn that I've been managing money since before she was born. Wednesday arrived with the kind of crisp winter morning that made Phoenix feel like paradise. Jessica picked me up at 10 for our tour of Sunset Manor, chattering excitedly about the facilities and the wonderful staff she'd spoken with. Dad, I think you're going to love this place, she said as we drove through the manicured entrance. The activities coordinator told me they have woodworking classes, and I know how much you enjoy working with your hands. Sunset Manor was exactly what the brochures had promised. Elegant, comfortable, and designed to make aging look like a luxury vacation. The staff was professional and friendly, the facilities were impressive, and the other residents seemed genuinely content. What do you think, Dad? Jessica asked as we finished the tour. Could you see yourself being happy here? I looked around the common area, watching elderly people playing bridge and doing puzzles, all of them clean and safe and completely without agency over their own lives. It's very nice, I said thoughtfully. Much nicer than I expected. The admissions coordinator said they could have your paperwork ready by Friday if we move quickly on the application. Friday, I repeated. That is quick. I know it seems fast, but Dad, good opportunities don't wait. And honestly, the sooner you make this transition, the better it will be for everyone. You're probably right, I said, and I meant it. The sooner this was over, the better it would be for everyone, just not in the way Jessica imagined. Thursday evening, the real estate agent that David had found came to evaluate my house. Sandra Chen was an energetic woman in her 40s who took extensive notes and measurements while Jessica followed her around, asking questions about pricing strategies and market timing. Based on recent sales in this area, Sandra said as she finished her assessment, I'd estimate the value at somewhere between $575,000 and $625,000. The market is very strong right now for properties like this. How quickly could we expect to sell? Jessica asked. With the right pricing strategy, probably within 30 days. Homes in this price range and condition are moving fast. Excellent, Jessica said, looking pleased. When could we get the listing paperwork prepared? I could have everything ready by early next week, assuming your father is ready to move forward. I nodded agreeably. Whatever Jessica thinks is best. After Sandra left, Jessica stayed for dinner. We sat in my kitchen, eating the lasagna that Maria had prepared the day before, and Jessica talked about her vision for my future. Dad, I know this is a big change, but I really think you're going to be happier at Sunset Manor. You'll have people to talk to, activities to keep you busy, and medical care right there if you need it. It does sound nice, I agreed, and I appreciate how much thought you've put into this. I just want you to be safe and comfortable. That's all I've ever wanted. I looked at my daughter across the table, seeing traces of the little girl who used to help me build birdhouses in the garage. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for what was about to happen to her. Friday morning, Tom Williamson called with news that would change everything. Harold, the paperwork is ready. My lawyer says we can close this afternoon if you're available. This afternoon sounds perfect, I said. What time? 3 o'clock at the title company on Central Avenue. Are you sure you don't want more time to think about this? Tom, I've been thinking about this for longer than you know. 3 o'clock it is. I called Maria immediately. It's time. Can you meet me at the title company at 2:30? I'll be there, at exactly 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon, while Jessica was probably at her weekly manicure appointment, completely unaware that her carefully laid plans were about to collapse. I signed the papers that transferred ownership of my house to the Williamson family. Tom and Sarah were almost giddy with excitement as they signed their names to what they clearly saw as the deal of a lifetime. Their lawyer kept double-checking the sale price, unable to believe that anyone would sell so far under market value. Harold, Sarah said as we finished the paperwork, I don't know how to thank you for this. Take care of the house, I said simply. Love it the way it deserves to be loved. That's all the thanks I need. By 4 o'clock it was done. The house that Jessica thought she was going to sell was already sold. The money that David thought he was going to manage was already beyond their reach. The future that they had planned for me was about to become their own nightmare. I drove home to what was no longer technically my home, and sat in my kitchen for the last time as the owner. Maria arrived 20 minutes later. How do you feel? She asked.
Like a man who just cut the strings that were tying him down, I said. Tomorrow morning I'm going to call Jessica and tell her about the tour on Wednesday. I'm going to thank her for all her help, and then I'm going to suggest that we celebrate with dinner at a nice restaurant tomorrow night. And then, I smiled, thinking about Jessica's face when she realized what had happened. Then we're going to have the most interesting family dinner of our lives. Harold, are you sure you're ready for what comes next? Jessica isn't going to take this well. I looked around the kitchen one more time. The kitchen where I'd made breakfast for Margaret every morning for 30 years, where I'd helped my granddaughter with her homework, where I'd planned to spend my remaining years in peace. Maria, I've spent the last month listening to my daughter plan my elimination while pretending to care about my welfare. I think I can handle her reaction when she finds out she eliminated herself instead. Saturday morning, I made the call that would set the final act in motion. Jessica, sweetheart, I wanted to thank you again for that wonderful tour on Wednesday. Sunset Manor really is everything you said it would be. Oh, Dad, I'm so glad you liked it. Have you given any more thought to the timeline? Actually, yes. I've decided that you're right about not waiting too long. Life is uncertain at my age, and I should make these decisions while I'm still able to think clearly. That's wonderful to hear, Dad. So you're ready to move forward with the application? I am. In fact, I was thinking we should celebrate this decision. Would you and David like to have dinner tomorrow night? Somewhere nice, my treat. That sounds lovely. Where did you have in mind? I thought about the most elegant restaurant in Scottsdale, the kind of place where private conversations carried clearly at nearby tables, where scenes couldn't be made without everyone noticing. How about Chez Laurent? 7 o'clock? Perfect, Dad. David and I will see you there. As I hung up the phone, I felt the same satisfaction that comes from completing a complex construction project. Every piece in place, every measurement precise, every joint perfectly fitted. Tomorrow night, Jessica was going to learn what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness, love for stupidity, and an old man's silence for surrender. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was watch it spring.
Sunday evening at Chez Laurent arrived with the kind of crisp December air that made Scottsdale feel like the perfect place to watch someone's world collapse in real time. I arrived 15 minutes early, as I always did for important appointments. The hostess, a young woman with perfectly styled hair and the kind of smile that cost extra, showed me to the table I'd specifically requested, a corner booth with clear sightlines to the entrance, and enough distance from other diners to ensure privacy without whispering. "Mr. Mitchell, your guest should be arriving shortly," she said, placing a menu in front of me. "Can I start you with something to drink?" "Macallan 18, neat," I said. "And please make sure we're not disturbed once my family arrives. We'll have some important family business to discuss." At exactly 7 o'clock, Jessica and David walked through the entrance. Jessica was dressed in what I recognized as her special occasion outfit, a navy blue dress that probably cost more than most people made in a week, paired with the pearl necklace I'd given her for her 40th birthday. David wore his armor of choice, a charcoal gray suit that screamed expensive lawyer and a tie that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. They looked like success. They looked like control. They looked like people who had never failed at anything important in their lives. That was about to change. "Dad!" Jessica approached the table with her arms extended, as if she was greeting a beloved family member instead of someone she'd been systematically planning to eliminate. "You look wonderful tonight. I'm so excited about our celebration. Jessica, sweetheart." "David." I stood up and embraced my daughter, noting how she felt smaller than I remembered, as if her confidence had been the thing making her seem larger all these years. "Thank you both for coming. This really is a special occasion. We wouldn't miss it," David said, shaking my hand with the firm grip he'd probably practiced in law school. "Jessica told me about your decision regarding Sunset Manor. I think you're making a very wise choice." "Oh, this isn't about Sunset Manor," I said, settling back into my seat as they arranged themselves across from me. "This is about something much more important than that." The waiter appeared as if summoned by some invisible signal. Jessica ordered a glass of Chardonnay, the expensive kind, naturally. David requested a martini, extra dry, extra olives, the kind of drink that announced you took yourself very seriously. I ordered another Macallan. "Dad, you're being mysterious," Jessica said with a laugh that sounded just slightly forced. "What's this really about?" "Patience, sweetheart. Let's order dinner first. I want to make sure we have plenty of time to talk without interruptions." For the next 20 minutes, we made small talk while reviewing menus and placing orders. Jessica chattered about her book club's latest selection, some novel about family dynamics that she found absolutely fascinating. David mentioned a complex estate case he was working on, something involving an elderly client whose children were trying to protect their inheritance from their father's poor decisions. I smiled and nodded and made appropriate responses, all while watching them carefully. Jessica kept checking her phone, the way people do when they're expecting important news. David kept glancing at his watch as if he had somewhere more important to be. They were both showing signs of barely contained excitement, like children on Christmas morning who knew exactly what presents were waiting under the tree. Finally, after our appetizers arrived and the waiter had refilled our drinks, I decided it was time. Jessica, David, I want to thank you both for everything you've done for me over the past few weeks, I said, raising my glass in what appeared to be a toast. Your concern for my welfare, your careful planning for my future, your attention to every detail of my care and comfort. It's been truly enlightening to see how much thought you've put into managing my life. Dad, we're just happy we could help, Jessica said, raising her own glass. That's what family is for. Yes, I agreed. That's exactly what family is for. Which is why I have some news to share with you both. David leaned forward slightly, the way lawyers do when they sense a negotiation is about to begin. What kind of news? Well, the house situation has been resolved. Jessica's face lit up like I'd just told her she'd won the lottery. Oh, that's wonderful. Did Sandra get back to you with the final market analysis? We're hoping to list it by the end of the week. Actually, the house has already been sold. The silence that followed was the kind you hear right before thunder. Jessica's wineglass stopped halfway to her lips. David's fork hung suspended over his salad, a piece of lettuce slowly sliding off it back onto the plate. Sold? Jessica's voice was barely above a whisper. What do you mean sold? I mean that as of Friday afternoon, the house legally belongs to the Williamson family. Tom and Sarah and their 2 children. Lovely people. They're going to take excellent care of it. David found his voice first. Harold, that's impossible. You can't have sold the house. We haven't even completed the application process for Sunset Manor. The financing arrangements aren't in place. The legal documentation. Oh, the legal documentation is complete, I said calmly, taking a sip of my whiskey. Maria and I spent Tuesday morning at the bank, restructuring my assets. Patricia Williams was very helpful in setting up new accounts at multiple institutions, and Marcus Wheeler handled the property transfer beautifully. Everything's been properly documented and filed with the county. Jessica's face had gone pale, but her voice was getting stronger. Dad, I don't understand. Why would you sell the house without talking to us first? We had plans. We had arrangements. You had plans, I corrected gently. I had different plans. But the money, David said, his lawyer's mind immediately jumping to the financial implications. Harold, you can't have gotten fair market value in a rushed sale. Did you at least get 500,000? 550? 450,000, I said. The number hit the table like a physical blow. Jessica actually gasped. David's face went through several different expressions before settling on something that looked like pain. 450. Jessica's voice cracked. Dad, that house was worth at least 600,000. You left $150,000 on the table. 150,000. I left it in good hands, I said. Tom teaches high school mathematics. Sarah's a pediatric nurse. They have 2 young children who will grow up in that house, play in that yard, make memories in those rooms. They'll love it the way your mother and I loved it. But Dad, Jessica said, and I could hear the desperation creeping into her voice. What about your care? What about Sunset Manor? How are you going to pay for everything? That's the beautiful thing about having your finances properly arranged, I said, pulling out a leather folder that Maria had helped me organize. When you have liquid assets properly distributed across multiple institutions, you have options. I opened the folder and laid out several bank statements on the table. Each one showed a different bank, a different account, and a different substantial balance. What you're looking at is approximately $800,000 in liquid assets, I said as David's eyes moved rapidly across the papers, his lawyer's brain obviously calculating. All of it easily accessible, all of it properly documented, and all of it completely under my control. 800,000, David repeated slowly. Harold, where did this money come from? 30 years of careful saving, smart investments, and living below my means, I said. Plus the proceeds from selling a house that I owned free and clear to a family who will treasure it. Jessica was staring at the bank statements like they were written in a foreign language. But Dad, if you have all this money, why didn't you tell us? We've been so worried about how to finance your care. Have you? I asked mildly, because from what I overheard 3 weeks ago, you seemed more worried about how to finance your own futures. The words fell into the space between us like stones into still water. Jessica's face went through several different expressions. Confusion, realization, and then something that looked like fear. What do you mean, what you overheard? I mean the conversation you and David had in my living room 3 weeks ago about my declining mental state, my dangerous forgetfulness, and your plans to sell my house to fund my elimination from independent living. David's professional composure finally cracked. Harold, I think there may have been some misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding, I said, my voice still calm but carrying an edge that made both of them sit back slightly. I heard every word. The board gas stove that I replaced 3 years ago. The supposed memory problems that don't exist.
The careful questions Maria told me you'd been asking for months, trying to build a case for my incompetence. Dad, Jessica said, her voice small and shaky, we were just concerned about your safety. Were you concerned about my safety when you scheduled real estate evaluations without my permission? Were you concerned about my safety when you had David prepare guardianship paperwork behind my back? The last part was a guess, but David's face told me I'd guessed correctly. I did prepare some preliminary documents, David admitted, but only as a precaution, in case I ever needed my own daughter to take control of my life and my assets for her own benefit. I finished. Yes, I can see how that might seem like a precaution to you. The waiter appeared, probably drawn by the tension radiating from our table. Is everything all right here? Can I get anything else? We're fine, I said without taking my eyes off Jessica and David. Just having a family discussion about respect and gratitude. After the waiter left, Jessica tried a different approach. Dad, even if we made some mistakes in how we approached this, our hearts were in the right place. We love you. We want what's best for you. Do you? Because what would be best for me is to live independently in my own home, managing my own affairs, making my own decisions about my care and my future. But that house is now owned by the Williamson family, which means I'll need to find other arrangements. Other arrangements? David asked. I've put a deposit down on a beautiful apartment at Desert Springs Active Living Community, I said. It's one of the places you showed me in your brochures, actually. Not quite as expensive as Sunset Manor, but it offers independent living with optional services as needed. The difference is that I chose it, I'm paying for it, and I can leave any time I want. Jessica looked like she was about to cry. But Dad, we could have helped you with all of this. We could have worked together to find the right solution. Could we? Because when I think back over the past month, I don't remember you asking me what I wanted. I remember you telling me what you thought I needed. I remember you making appointments and arrangements and plans, all designed to make my problems easier for you to manage. That's not fair, Jessica said, and now there were actual tears in her eyes. We were trying to take care of you. No, I said firmly. You were trying to take care of yourselves. You saw an elderly man living alone in a valuable house, and you saw an opportunity to solve your problems at my expense. Our problems. David's voice had an edge to it now. Harold, what problems do you think we have? I reached into my folder again and pulled out several more papers. These are printouts of public records. Your mortgage payments, David, are currently 60 days behind. Jessica's credit card debt is approximately $47,000. The boutique business that I helped fund 3 years ago actually generated tax losses that you've been carrying forward to offset other income. Both of their faces had gone very still. You needed money, I continued. You saw my house, you saw what you thought was a confused old man, and you developed a plan to get what you needed while making it look like you were helping me. Dad, Jessica whispered, how did I find out? I hired a private investigator. Same way I found out about the real estate consultations you had last month before you ever mentioned Sunset Manor to me. Same way I found out about the preliminary conversations David had with elder care attorneys about the legal requirements for declaring someone incompetent. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Other diners continued their conversations around us, unaware that they were witnessing the complete destruction of a family's carefully constructed lies. Finally, David spoke. What do you want from us, Harold? I want honesty, I said. I want you to acknowledge that this was never about my welfare. This was about your welfare. I want you to admit that you saw me as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be respected. Jessica was crying openly now, but they weren't the tears of someone who was sorry for what they'd done. They were the tears of someone who was sorry they'd been caught. And then what, she asked. After we admit everything, then what happens? Then we figure out how to rebuild a relationship based on truth instead of manipulation, I said. But that's going to take time, and it's going to require you both to understand that I'm not a dependent elderly man who needs to be managed. I'm your father, and I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions about my own life. But the money, David said, apparently unable to let go of the financial implications. Harold, you've made decisions that have cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's not rational financial planning, isn't it? I've ensured that a house I loved will be loved by people who deserve it. I've maintained complete control over my assets and my future. I've removed myself from a family dynamic that was built on false assumptions about my capabilities. And I've taught my daughter that there are consequences for treating people like problems instead of treating them like family. I finished my whiskey and signaled for the check. The money I lost by selling below market value bought me something worth much more than $150,000. It bought me my freedom from your expectations and your plans for my life. So what happens now? Jessica asked. Now you go home and figure out how to solve your financial problems without using me as your solution, I said. And I go home to my new apartment and enjoy my independence. Will we still see you? Jessica's voice was very small. That depends, I said. Are you going to keep trying to manage my life, or are you going to start treating me like a competent adult who happens to be your father? Jessica and David exchanged glances. The confidence they'd walked in with had been completely stripped away, replaced by something that looked like genuine uncertainty. "We need to talk," David said finally. "Jessica and I need to have some serious conversations about how we've been handling this." "Yes," I agreed. "You do." The waiter brought the check, and I paid it without comment. As we stood to leave, Jessica reached out and touched my arm. "Dad, I do love you. I hope you know that." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw traces of the little girl who used to bring me drawings she'd made at school, who used to fall asleep on my lap during television shows, who used to tell me I was the smartest dad in the world. "I know you do, sweetheart," I said gently. "But love isn't enough if it doesn't come with respect. And respect means trusting me to make my own decisions, even when you don't agree with them." We walked out of the restaurant together, but we weren't walking in the same direction anymore. Jessica and David headed toward their Mercedes, while I walked toward my truck, parked under a streetlight that cast everything in sharp, clear shadows. As I drove home to pack my belongings for the move to my new apartment, I thought about the conversation Maria and I would have later that night. I thought about the thank you note I would write to Tom and Sarah Williamson. I thought about the phone call I would make to Emma, my granddaughter, to let her know that her grandfather was doing just fine and looking forward to whatever came next. Most of all, I thought about the profound quiet that comes when you finally stop letting other people write the story of your life and pick up the pen yourself. For the first time in months, that quiet felt like peace.